As dusk settled over the city, the fading golden light stretched long shadows across the busy streets. Mark Allen walked steadily along the pavement, one hand gripping a paper bag of groceries, the other holding his young son's small hand. The evening air was crisp, carrying the distant sounds of traffic mingled with snippets of conversation from passers-by. Mark glanced down at his son, Liam, who was humming softly, his eyes bright despite the long day. They were just a few blocks from their apartment, the familiar sights of street vendors packing up and shopkeepers locking doors signaling the day's end. The city was alive with the usual rhythm of people heading home or out for the night. Mark felt a quiet contentment in this routine, the simple pleasure of an ordinary evening with his son. Suddenly, a sharp cry cut through the ambient noise. Mark's head snapped toward the sound, a woman's voice, tense and urgent. Ahead, near a dimly lit alleyway, a man was struggling with another, their shadows flashing violently against the brick walls. The scene was unmistakable, a mugging in progress. Mark's heart pounded as he tightened his grip on Liam's hand. His mind raced. Should he intervene? The logical part of him urged caution, but instinct and a deep-seated sense of responsibility propelled him forward. He set the grocery bag down gently beside a park bench and moved briskly toward the confrontation. "Hey!" Mark called out firmly, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The assailant, a young man with a wild desperation in his eyes, glanced up, momentarily startled. The victim, a man in his late 30s, struggled to break free, clutching a worn leather wallet. "Leave him alone." Mark stepped closer, his body squared and ready. His voice carried an authority that seemed to freeze the attacker for a heartbeat. The mugger snarled and lunged, but Mark reacted swiftly, grabbing the man's arm to halt the motion. A brief scuffle ensued, Mark's years of amateur boxing training surfacing as he deftly dodged a clumsy swing and used leverage to push the attacker back. Within moments, the mugger, realizing he was outmatched and drawing unwanted attention, fled down the alley, disappearing into the gathering shadows. Mark exhaled slowly, his pulse still racing, and turned to the victim. The man's chest heaved as he tried to steady his breathing. His eyes, wide and alert, searched Mark's face before his expression shifted to something Mark hadn't expected: recognition. "Mark," the man whispered, disbelief threading through his voice. Mark froze. The victim's face was familiar, hauntingly so. The years melted away, and memories flickered to life. Laughter shared over coffee, long talks under starlit skies, a friendship that had once meant everything. "Tom." Mark responded, voice low, tinged with shock. The man nodded slowly, a faint smile breaking through the tension. The world around them seemed to pause for a moment, the city noises dimming as the two men stood surrounded by the fading light and the echoes of a shared past. Mark knelt beside Tom, his protective instincts kicking in. "Are you okay? Did he take your wallet?" Tom shook his head. "No, I managed to hold onto it. Thanks to you." Mark glanced down at Liam, who was watching with wide eyes, clutching his father's leg. Mark gave his son a reassuring smile before turning back to Tom. "What happened? Where have you been?" Tom looked away briefly, then back at Mark, the weight of unspoken stories heavy in his gaze. "It's a long story," he said quietly. Mark nodded, understanding that this was just the beginning of a difficult conversation, but for now, the immediate danger was over. He helped Tom to his feet, steadying him. "Let's get you somewhere safe. You can tell me everything when you're ready." Together, they began walking toward the busy street, the city lights flickering on one by one, casting a hazy glow over the evening. Liam, still holding Mark's hand, looked up at the two men with curiosity and a hint of concern. As they disappeared into the flow of people, Mark's mind buzzed with questions and a cautious hope. The night had brought an unexpected reunion, and though the path ahead was uncertain, Mark knew he wouldn't turn away from a friend in need. Not now, not ever. The next morning broke with soft sunlight filtering through the thin curtains of Mark's modest apartment. The aroma of brewing coffee mingled with the faint sounds of a cartoon playing softly in the background. Mark stood at the small kitchen counter, carefully flipping pancakes while Liam sat at the table, eagerly watching and occasionally bouncing in his chair. Mark's routine was well practiced, a delicate dance of preparing breakfast, packing school lunches, and making sure Liam was dressed and ready for the day. The responsibilities of being a single father were constant, but Mark embraced them with quiet determination. His life revolved around Liam, the boy who had become both his anchor and his greatest joy. As Liam reached for a syrup bottle, Mark's mind wandered briefly to last night's unexpected encounter. The image of Tom's face haunted him, not just the shock of seeing an old friend after so many years, but the questions that now hung in the air. What had happened to Tom during their time apart? Why had he vanished without a word? Mark pushed the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the present moment. He called out gently, "Liam, finish your breakfast, then we'll head out. I've got to drop you off at school before work." Liam nodded, syrup dripping down his chin, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension swirling in his father's mind. After the school run, Mark's day settled into its usual rhythm, shuffling between his job at the local hardware store and the errands that kept their small world running smoothly. Yet, amid the mundane tasks, his thoughts kept returning to Tom. Their friendship had been a defining part of his youth, two inseparable boys bound by shared dreams and secrets. Flashbacks surfaced unbidden, afternoons spent at the park, laughter echoing as they tossed a football back and forth, late-night talks about the future and the places they'd go. Tom had been like a brother, the kind of friend who knew you better than yourself. Then, one day, without explanation, Tom had disappeared. No calls, no messages, just silence. Mark remembered the sharp ache of that absence, the confusion and worry that gnawed at him for years. Friends and family had said Tom probably moved away, or drifted into a different crowd. But Mark had never stopped wondering. He had searched for answers quietly, hoping to find some trace of the friend he'd lost. Now, seeing Tom again, bruised and vulnerable, stirred a complex mix of relief and sorrow. The man before him was a stranger in many ways, but also the same soul Mark had once trusted implicitly. That afternoon, Mark found a rare moment of solitude in his small living room. He sat on the worn couch, staring at the cracked photo frame on the coffee table, a faded picture of him and Tom, grinning wide and carefree, taken years ago at the county fair. The memory was bittersweet. A sudden knock at the door broke the silence. Mark rose, opening it to find Tom standing there, hesitant but determined. His clothes were threadbare, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. "Can I come in?" Tom asked quietly. Mark stepped back, gesturing toward the apartment. "Of course." Tom entered, taking in the modest surroundings with a mixture of gratitude and unease. Liam peeked from the hallway, curiosity mingling with shyness. Mark cleared his throat. "Why don't you sit down? I made coffee." Tom nodded, settling into the chair by the window. The light caught the weary lines on his face, the weight of untold stories pressing down on him. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was heavy but not uncomfortable, a fragile bridge between past and present. Finally, Tom broke the quiet. "I've been through some tough times," he said, voice low. "Things I'm not proud of. I didn't mean to disappear like that. I didn't know how to come back." Mark listened intently, the years of unanswered questions now beginning to find shape. "What happened?" he asked gently. Tom's gaze dropped to his hands. "I lost my job, my apartment. I ended up on the streets for a while. I was ashamed to reach out. I thought I could handle it alone, but it got worse." Mark felt a pang of empathy, mixed with frustration. "You didn't have to go through that by yourself. You could have called me." "I know," Tom admitted, voice cracking slightly. "I was scared. I didn't want to burden anyone, especially not you." Mark shook his head, a soft smile touching his lips. "You're never a burden. You're my friend. That's what matters." They talked for hours, the conversation weaving through memories and confessions, hopes and regrets. Mark shared stories of Liam's milestones, the small victories and challenges of fatherhood. Tom listened, occasionally smiling, his eyes reflecting a flicker of hope. Despite the years apart, a thread of connection held strong between them, fragile but real. Mark realized that helping Tom find stability would be more than an act of kindness. It was a chance to heal a wound that time had only deepened. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, Mark resolved to reach out to social services and old acquaintances who might support Tom's recovery. He couldn't promise a quick fix, but he could offer a steady hand. Liam wandered into the room, breaking the intensity with a question. "Dad, can Tom play with me?" Mark glanced at Tom, whose face softened at the boy's innocence. "Sure, Liam. Why don't you show him your toys?" The small moment of normalcy was a balm for all three, a glimpse of what could be, beyond hardship and regret. Mark watched as Tom crouched beside Liam, laughter beginning to bubble between them. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, hope felt possible. Later, as Mark prepared dinner, he caught himself smiling quietly. The day's weight was heavy, but beneath it lay a growing resolve. Rekindling a lost friendship was never easy, especially when shadows of the past lingered. But Mark knew that sometimes the hardest journeys began with a single step, and he was ready to take it. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the narrow windows of the community center where Mark had arranged to meet Tom. The room was plain but welcoming, filled with the quiet hum of other visitors and the faint scent of freshly brewed coffee from the nearby kitchen. Tom sat in a worn chair, hands folded nervously in his lap, while Mark leaned against a table, watching him carefully. "I know this isn't easy," Mark said softly, "but talking about it can help. Whatever you're comfortable sharing." Tom's eyes flickered with hesitation before settling on a distant point beyond the window. "It's complicated," he began, voice low and rough from disuse. "After I lost my job, things spiraled fast. I was evicted, and then, well, the streets were the only place left." Mark nodded, silently urging him to continue. "I tried to keep it together at first," Tom said, swallowing hard. "But the nights were cold, and people out there, they're not always kind. I got involved with a few bad crowds, just to survive. Made mistakes I wish I could take back." The admission hung heavy in the air. Mark's heart ached for the friend he'd once known, a man now shadowed by hardship and regret. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," Mark said quietly. "But you're here now. We'll figure this out." Tom managed a small, grateful smile. "Thanks, Mark. It means a lot." The conversation shifted as Tom opened up about the loneliness and the fear that had gripped him during those dark months. He spoke of nights spent in shelters, the constant worry about where his next meal would come from, and the crushing weight of shame that kept him from reaching out to anyone. Mark listened, his protective instincts flaring. He thought about Liam, about the security and warmth he took for granted, and the desperate courage it must have taken for Tom to survive without that safety net. As the afternoon wore on, Mark suggested they explore options for support: housing programs, job training, counseling. Tom agreed, though the uncertainty in his eyes was unmistakable. "We'll take it one step at a time," Mark assured him. "You're not alone anymore." Later, as they walked outside, the city's noise seemed to fade, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. Liam, who had been waiting nearby, ran to Tom with a bright smile, tugging his hand. Tom's face softened as he crouched down to greet the boy. "Hey, Liam. How's my favorite little guy?" Mark watched them together, feeling a warmth settle in his chest. The bond between father and son was strong, but now it extended, tentatively, to include his old friend. That evening, Mark sat in his modest kitchen, the quiet punctuated only by the ticking clock. He thought about the journey ahead, for Tom, for himself, and for the chance to rebuild what had been lost. The memories of their youth mingled with the reality of the present, creating a tapestry of pain and possibility. Mark knew the path wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks and challenges, doubts and fears. But as he looked at the photo of him and Tom from years ago, he felt a renewed determination. They had faced the past together, and now it was time to face the future. Mark sat on the edge of his worn couch, the dim light of the evening casting long shadows across the small living room. Tom had been staying with him for a few weeks now, a quiet presence in the background as Mark tried to balance his life as a father with the growing responsibility of helping his old friend rebuild. The apartment, once just a simple refuge for Mark and Liam, had transformed into a fragile shelter for both men, each carrying their own scars. Tom stood by the window, staring out at the city skyline, the weight of his past pressing heavily on his shoulders. Mark watched him, sensing the turmoil beneath the surface. "It's not just about finding a job or a place to stay," Tom said finally, voice low. "It's everything I went through while I was gone. The people I met, the things I did, they don't just disappear." Mark nodded slowly. "You don't have to face it alone. We can get through this together." But even as he spoke the words, Mark felt the tension building, not just within Tom, but within himself. The memories of their youth were interwoven with the harsh reality of the present, and the protective instinct that had always defined Mark now extended beyond his son to this friend who had re-emerged from the shadows. One afternoon, as Mark returned home from work, he found Tom pacing in the small kitchen, his face strained and restless. "Something wrong?" Mark asked, setting down his bag. Tom stopped and looked up, a flicker of unease in his eyes. "I think some of the people from my past, they're looking for me." Mark's heart tightened. "What do you mean?" "There was a man last night," Tom explained, voice barely above a whisper. "He came by, asked questions about me. Said I owed money, that I hadn't paid my debts." Mark clenched his jaw. "We can handle this. You're not on your own anymore." But Tom shook his head. "It's not that simple. These people, they don't just let things go. If they come after me, they'll bring trouble to you and Liam too." Mark's protective instincts flared fiercely. "I won't let anyone hurt my family." That night, Mark sat with Liam at the kitchen table, the boy's innocent questions about the world outside a stark contrast to the danger looming nearby. Mark struggled to find the right words, balancing the need to protect his son from harsh realities with the truth of their situation. The next day, Mark reached out to an old acquaintance from his youth, someone who had knowledge of the city's undercurrents and could offer guidance. They arranged to meet discreetly at a local cafe, a place where stories and secrets mingled with the aroma of strong coffee. Sitting across from the contact, Mark listened as he detailed the risks Tom faced. The debts were tied to a small but dangerous network, and the men involved didn't hesitate to use violence to collect what they believed was owed. Mark's jaw tightened. "What's the best way to keep Tom and my family safe?" The contact leaned in, voice low and serious. "You need to show strength. Let them know you're not someone to be messed with. But also be smart. Don't confront them directly without backup." Mark nodded, a plan forming in his mind. He would stand firm, protect those he cared about, but he would also be cautious. This was no longer just about friendship or past mistakes. It was about survival. Returning home, Mark shared the news with Tom. The fear in Tom's eyes was palpable, but beneath it was a flicker of resolve. "We face this together," Mark said firmly. "I won't let them break you down." In the days that followed, Mark's focus sharpened. He researched self-defense techniques, spoke with local authorities, and prepared his apartment for any possible confrontation. Liam's safety remained paramount, and Mark found himself more vigilant than ever. One evening, as Mark and Tom sat quietly in the living room, the faint sound of footsteps outside made them both tense. Mark moved to the window, peering into the darkness. A shadow lingered near the entrance of the building, a reminder that the past was never far behind. Tom's voice was steady despite the fear. "They're here." Mark's hand found Tom's shoulder, a silent promise. "We are ready." When the doorbell rang moments later, Mark opened the door to face two men whose eyes held cold intent. The confrontation was tense but measured. Mark's calm assertiveness and the knowledge that he wasn't alone seemed to give the men pause. After a brief exchange, the visitors left, their threats lingering like a dark cloud but without immediate violence. Mark closed the door and turned to Tom. "They'll be back, but we stood our ground." Tom nodded, a mix of relief and determination settling over him. "I'm done running." The bond between the two men deepened as they prepared to face whatever came next. Mark's role as a father extended now to protector of a friend, his instincts sharpened by the challenges ahead. Together, they reclaimed a piece of their friendship, fighting not just for survival but for the chance to rebuild a life free from fear. As night fell over the city, Mark sat beside Tom, the hum of distant traffic a steady reminder that the world continued on, unforgiving but full of possibility. The morning sun filtered gently through the curtains, casting a warm glow over Mark's modest apartment. The air was filled with the scent of brewing coffee and the faint sound of laughter echoing from the living room. Mark stood by the window, watching Liam and Tom play together on the floor, their faces alight with genuine happiness. The transformation in Tom was palpable. No longer haunted by shadows, he was beginning to reclaim his life with steady, hopeful steps. Tom had found a part-time job at a nearby community center, helping to organize youth programs, a small but significant start toward rebuilding his future. Each day, he grew more confident, the weight of his past slowly lifting as he embraced this second chance. Mark observed the bond forming between Liam and Tom, a connection that had blossomed through shared moments of joy and trust. The boy's innocent enthusiasm seemed to breathe new life into Tom, who, in turn, had become a steady presence in their lives. One afternoon, Mark received a call from Detective Harris, a familiar voice on the other end. "Mark, we've got some news regarding the case you mentioned about your friend's disappearance years ago." Mark's heart quickened. "What did you find?" "DNA evidence from a recent investigation has linked several arrests to the people involved in that case," the detective explained. "It's a breakthrough. Justice might finally be within reach." Mark felt a surge of relief and closure. The mysteries that had lingered for so long were beginning to unravel, offering a chance to put the past to rest. Later that evening, as Mark tucked Liam into bed, the boy looked up with wide eyes. "Dad, is Tom going to stay with us forever?" Mark smiled softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from Liam's forehead. "Tom's a part of our family now. We look out for each other." After Liam drifted off to sleep, Mark sat alone in the quiet kitchen, the weight of the day settling around him. He reached for the small black bracelet that hung from the rearview mirror of his old car, a symbol he had worn during the hardest times, a reminder of the promises made and kept. His journey had taken him from loss and uncertainty to healing and purpose. The friendship rekindled with Tom had not only restored a piece of his past, but it also forged a new path forward. Mark reflected on the lessons learned, the importance of standing firm, the power of forgiveness, and the strength found in connection. He understood that life's challenges were not meant to be faced alone, and that sometimes the greatest victories came from opening one's heart to others. As dawn approached, Mark felt a renewed sense of hope. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but he was ready. With Liam by his side and Tom's newfound stability, Mark embraced the future, not just as a father, but as a friend and protector. Together, they would face whatever came next, bound by trust, resilience, and the promise of new beginnings.